Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of interviewing historians. My name is McKenna White, and I'm a student fellow at the Civil War Institute. And today I am here with Dr. Carol Reardon, who is a professor of American history at Penn State University and an adjunct professor of history and Civil War era studies at Gettysburg College. And Dr. Reardon, you are doing a staff ride for next summer's conference. So for people who don't know, can you just explain a little bit what a staff ride is?
Sure. A staff ride is a professional military education exercise that was invented really by the Prussians back in the early 19th century. Napoleon had just beaten them really badly. And rather than just gripe about it and hang their heads in shame, they decided instead to learn. And so they visited the battlefields of their greatest recent defeats and began to ask rather penetrating questions. What did Napoleon do to win? What did we do to lose? What could we have done better? They became very inwardly driven to learn more about their profession. It was made more immediate because they did it on the site of the actual battle that they had fought in. The practice became so successful that the French and the British picked it up. And in time, in the late 19th century, the United States Army picked it up as well. The heyday originally for these staff rides was the period between the 1890s and World War I. And they kind of disappeared, but in the post-Vietnam years, they became popular again. And right now, it's an integral part of professional military education in all the armed services.
And what are some of the benefits of doing a staff ride as opposed to traditional classroom work?
Well, being out in fresh air is always a great break for class. Being able to think about a clash of arms in real time and in space makes a big difference. It's seeing it in 3 dimensions as opposed to a map or just reading it in a book makes a big difference. But there's just something about the disconnect from the regular classroom that helps you look at things differently and think about things a bit more fresh. And you don't go in, you just don't show up in a battlefield and say we're doing a staff ride. There's always a preparation piece. And that's one of the things that we do now with ROTC cadets. ROTC cadets, like the ones here at Gettysburg College, have to do a staff ride as a pre-commissioning requirement. And so I have a team that we help them do that kind of thing. But there's an awful lot of prep that goes into it. And the big reason for them being here, and it doesn't have to be just Gettysburg, it can be any Civil War, it can be any battle. It doesn't even have to be a battle. The Army has done things down in Andersonville, for instance, which certainly isn't a battlefield, but it allows you to think about a whole range of questions connected with prisoners of war. But there's something about the immediacy of being on site that cannot be duplicated in the classroom.
So you talked a little bit about preparation. What does that entail?
What we usually do when we set these things up is we provide a baseline reading so that everybody comes with a certain fundamental understanding about what the battle's all about. We don't want them to come in as blank slates. We want them to at least have a functioning capability to talk about Meade and Lee here at Gettysburg. We want them to know something about them. Well, just merely the fact that it's a 3-day battle. We have to think about it as it unfolds. But beyond that, what we usually do with any kind of a staff ride group is to break them down into smaller teams. We call them briefing teams because basically, if the facilitator, leader, is doing all the talking, then it's not really a staff ride. It's one where you teach each other and you question each other, you challenge each other. So each briefing team is usually set up around a key leader of the battle. We always start with John Buford out on McPherson's Ridge. And then we will go through a series that usually includes General Ewell up on Oak Hill, General Longstreet, down around the Mississippi and Louisiana lines, General Sickles, of course, you have to do him a repeat
Of
trip.
course.
When Little Round Top is open, we use either Chamberlain or Warren up there. We usually use General Hancock either on the second or third day as we need him. We use General Green over Clubs Hill. We usually have about 8 individuals who we've selected, and then provided the cadets with some readings, some their after action reports, some basic knowledge that's specialized for each briefing. And then as we go around the field, each team in turn will come up and basically take over the instruction. And what they will do is not, and this is probably the most important, they will not do a history brief. The facilitator who leads the staff ride will begin at each stop by explaining, first of all, where we are standing and do an orientation to terrain. So you know where Little Round Top is and Culp Hill. The second thing that we will invariably do as the facilitator is summarize the historical action that happened here. And then when we're done doing the history piece, we turn it over to the cadets. What we have told the cadets in advance is if you never leave 1863, you are not doing your job. Because what they're supposed to do now is to take everything that they've learned in their leadership labs, everything they've learned in their ROTC classes, everything that they've learned in their summer camps. Most of the cadets we take out are what they call MS4s, basically military science for their seniors. They're about to be commissioned. So this is almost like their capstone in many ways. So just as you would be familiar with your capstone, this is the ROTC capstone in some. And what they'll do at each of their stops, say your team view. Okay, there's maybe 3 or 4 who are assigned to the team. One of you will provide a biography, but if all you're talking about is here's where he was born and here's who he married, and here's where he died, not quite doing the job. You're going to have to explain, okay, he's a West Point graduate. These were his previous assignments before Gettysburg. Here's where he has experience. Here's where he doesn't have any experience. And this is the situation in which he finds himself this day. So how well has he been prepared, and has he prepared himself for the challenges he faces on the battlefield? And every officer ends up doing that for themselves, basically, as they walk into their next challenge. What do I know? What don't I know? What skills do I know? What skills do I have to develop? And there's an awful lot of self-knowledge that goes on that you learn about yourself by observing others as well. The Army has some frameworks that one is called the Army Leadership Requirements Model. And it talks about leaders' competencies and leaders' attributes. And every ROTC cadet can pretty much recite these things. So they can, the members of the Team Buford can stand there and basically run through all those things that they've learned in lab and apply them to Buford and decide at the end, is Buford a good officer or bad? Do I want to serve under it or do I not want to serve under it? And Buford always comes out very good, but that's not always the case. And Buford, there's not that much controversy with Buford. Can you imagine what happened when it's Dan Sickles or even James Longston? Well, that's where some real interesting learning comes in, because those cases have are not quite as you can imagine. So basically, when we are out there with the on staff ride, like I say, if we are only in 1863, we are not doing our jobs. So we run them through the leadership. And then we might say something like, what about the principles of war? Every cadet knows something about the principles of war, whether it be offensive or objective, something like that. And so one of the cadets will be in charge of saying, okay, based on what we saw Buford do here, he was really good at these principles. These do not apply to this situation. This one he broke horribly or something like that. But it's going to change at every stop. It's no one single pathway to follow. And if we don't use principles of war, there are a lot of other frameworks that we can use, which I would use to set in the prep phase to set them up, going out in. We wouldn't use it with visiting civilians who come join us at the Institute, But if you're with soldiers who have been preparing for all this, we can throw out things like the principle of mission command and the importance of a variety of specific tasks and things like that. We wouldn't do this with civilians, like the folks who'd be at the Institute this summer. But if we have ROTC cadets out there, they will have learned in their leadership lab about things like the principles and tenets of unified land operations, which of course makes your head just kind of spin. But, and we wouldn't use that with visitors who have never had any exposure to it. But if you're an ROTC cadet on a staff ride, you know exactly what to do with that. And so you can maybe appreciate a little bit more now how this is taking everything that you've learned in the lab and you're applying it to real world situations, to real leaders who make real decisions on this real ground. And you walk away with a lot more practical capability to handle those kinds of issues.
All right, and for my last question, what can the visitors who are taking your staff ride next summer expect from it or to take away from it?
Well, we might end up in corners of the battlefield that they don't visit very much. You also might learn a little bit of the language of the soldiers. There's no way to do a staff ride without using a little bit of professional language in here a little bit. And if I can have a few of you walking away saying something about the importance of the commander's intent, I'm going to get a big smile on my face. If you know something about not just initiative, but start using the phrase disciplined initiative within commander's intent, that means you've really grasped it. There are an awful lot of words that we're used to using whenever we read about Civil War history, command and control, and things like initiative that we use, but we use rather carelessly. We don't use it in a way that soldiers today would recognize. Well, when you walk away from the line, the precision of your thought should be greatly enhanced. And it's just an exposure to a teaching tool that most civilians don't have a chance to experience. So try something new.
Well, I'm sure that this is going to get people really looking forward to your staff ride. I think it sounds super interesting. And thank you for your time.
You're quite welcome.